Thank you, Pooja. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a very, very exciting session and exciting conversation on a topic that's very close to my heart, actually, for any technologist's heart. Dark, right? And while the headline of this topic, "The future is dark," sounds ominous, but it also represents some of the most exciting leap forwards in the human technology evolution, if you will. And who better than these two amazing panelists I have with me to have a conversation around these topics. Paul Zuber, who comes from, like Pooja mentioned, from Thoma, one of the world's most significant technology private equity investors. And I'm sure Paul gets to see a lot of exciting things that are happening in the dark world out there. Would be lovely to hear his perspective. And Tarun Sharma, who's the ex-CIO of CEO of BMC Asia Pacific, has led the transformation of a company that had to deal with dark disruption, if you will, and is now leading a startup of his own that's leveraging dark technologies for elder care, another area that the whole planet needs as well. So it's going to be an exciting conversation. Paul, Tarun, welcome to the session, and thank you so much for taking time out for this. I know you're both, Paul, you're out there in the US, Tarun, you are in Canada right now, so thank you very much for being with us here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Sumit. Thank you for inviting me to this session. I mean, as a technologist, I love watching and keeping track of all the trends, and this is definitely a trend that's got everybody's attention.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm sure all of the people who are watching this session, they understand what dark represents, right? So distributed ledgers and the trust equation that they help bring to the online communities, artificial intelligence that all of us are quite familiar with and aware of, augmented and virtual reality, and then quantum computing. I'll start with you, Paul, right? Your take as you see more and more tech innovations starting to orchestrate around these technologies, from Bitcoin to medtech to healthcare, etc. What are you beginning to see in this space? What are some of your perspectives? What sort of adventurism, if you will, are you coming across as you look at different companies in this space?
Well, I'll preface my remarks with two things. One, coming from the operating side of our business rather than the investment side, I'm really involved in kind of how we build and deploy a lot of the companies. The second thing I'll say is, we're not an early stage investor, so we do buyouts of mature companies. We're multi-asset, multi-fund business now, so traditionally, we've been buying more mature companies where you may see applications of some of these technologies, but we do have a growth equity fund, and that is involved in some of the earlier stage businesses, not real early stage, but later. So, we're investors in companies like Figment and FTX. What we're seeing is, we think in general thesis for how we invest, we're pretty still in the early stages of software. Software is very early. Everyone thinks it's a big mature business, but it's actually, in our view, quite early. And so when we look at things like blockchain and crypto, the macro trends are, is this going to make life simpler with less friction and more transparent and with lower cost? And, when those answers are yes, those are probably good secular trends to back. So, we're involved in that. Trends like the artificial intelligence, we're not investing necessarily in AI startups, but, a great example is a company, Dynatrace, which developed a next generation platform built around artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. So we tend to see the application of a lot of these technologies rather than the early stage and some of the newer kind of applications and things that are talked about, both in a positive and in a negative way.
Excellent, excellent. And Tarun, talk to me a little bit about the possibility of disruption of traditional ways of computing or traditional application ecosystem, etc. What have been some of your experiences in that area?
Sumit, in what context? I'm in two different contexts, right? And when I led BMC Software, it was a very different context. It was about IT management, and now I'm in the space of elder care. So a very different space.
Correct.
I think in both of these contexts, all these technologies did play a very crucial role. I mean, when it was BMC software, I mean, we were at that point. Now, again, I don't know what the current state is because I left BMC in 2019. But at that point, we were evaluating whether blockchains or digital ledger technology would be a building base of keeping track of IT assets, for example, within large companies, right? We were using artificial intelligence to provide very human-like interactions when people had issues that they were trying to resolve through a system like Remedy. So we had, a whole lot of those technologies, but I'm really much more into what we're doing on the elder care space. And almost everything that we talk about, DARQ, has an application to a problem like elder care. For example, imaging, artificial intelligence, and machine learning plays a very important role in the use of cameras to determine whether a parent is in trouble. If you see blood on his face, if you see a bruise on his face, or you detect a limp in his walk, those are the things that you want to pick up to figure out whether an investigation is required, right? If you're talking about distributed ledger technology, today we don't do it. We use MongoDB to keep track of all the incidents. But if you want to prevent yourself from negligence, then you need to make sure that you have very accurate record keeping, especially in times of an emergency. All the steps that were taken, you want those to be undisputable, to be able to make sure that people can build a trust relationship with the company that I now run, a company called Yodda. So you're almost looking at all facets of it. I don't want to claim that we're doing anything that scales up, and you have a lot of data sitting around and you're doing a lot of image processing and artificial intelligence, then at that point in time, quantum computing might become important. So, all aspects is similarly, even with extended reality. You can envision a situation where, through sensory perceptions, you can talk to your parents that are 5,000 miles away, right? I could feel like my mom sitting right here in front of me on a sofa, and I'm having a conversation with her. All these technologies are still coming together. Some are, of course, much more advanced than the others. But over a period of time, I want to say within the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of the things become real and become less clunky, so to say.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely right, sir. Right. So as things shape up, I mean, Metaverse is a great example, right? Metaverse and NFTs and what's happening in that space. I sometimes feel like I've come from another planet when I hear about sort of things that are happening. Some thoughts of yours, Tarun, before I dive into some very specific, interesting observations that I wanted to pick up.
See, all these technologies, I think, have two different applications, right? One is for the enterprise and one is for the consumer. Things like NFT are becoming very popular, where people are going out and buying art and music and digital rights to those. They've got a lot of collectibles. I think those are all on the consumer side. Zoom, which was always enterprise technology during the pandemic, became a household name. And I think the next step to that, of course, is the use of more senses in your communication. So I think that on the enterprise side, it's very simple, because you could, with this meeting that we're having, all of it is in 2 dimension, could become 3 dimension very easily. They could become holograms later, and the audience that is participating could feel like you're literally sitting on a stage. There's still some time to come to that. But on the enterprise side, the metaverse has a very different connotation, and that is, I think, a little bit faster. It's going to happen a little bit faster than on the consumer side. Now, the young kids, of course, are really excited about it. And I'm actually worried about the day that everybody's just sitting around on the sofa with those VR glasses, and they are in a world of their own, interacting with people. It's just a different social form. They're still going to be very, very social in their digital avatars floating around in the metaverse, but it's still quite social. So, on both sides, the consumer side as well as the enterprise side, I see these technologies will continue to pick up. It will continue to pick. And I think a lot of people will make a lot of money, especially on NFTs. People are putting up their Instagram photos as NFTs and monetizing those too.
Correct. That's true. Paul, and this is very, very interesting, right? So Paul, what's your take on augmented and virtual reality starting to become mainstream as time goes on? I mean, if you look at today, maybe aircraft simulators are possibly the best example of literally a near real world sort of an experience that a pilot gets when they're training on how to fly an airplane. Do you see this starting to creep, not, I won't say creep, starting to become available to us even at a household level? What's your thinking on that area?
Well, I'm not great in the prediction business, but I will say the last company I ran before joining Thoma Bravo 11 years ago, one of the applications of our solutions was augmented reality. And that was 14 years ago.
Wow.
And so, these things take a while, both from an adoption standpoint, but just from a technical standpoint. And, obviously what we're seeing is an incredible amount of computing power and cheap storage and lots of data. So we need technologies that can really handle this amount of data and amount in real time and have the computing power. And 15 years ago, we started to see some of these apps. Now they're really starting to come to the mainstream. And I think, when new technologies come out, I think back to the microprocessor, when Intel developed first microprocessor, their business plan was for 3,000 units. That's all they envisioned. There might be 3,000 units worldwide. And I guess the one thing that I've really learned is we don't really know what the applications will be, but when you're solving, a technical problem, whether it's something like an augmented reality or a blockchain that is going to, give you the ability to do things you couldn't do before, it's really hard to envision where you're ultimately going to end up. But what's always been true, at least my experience in Silicon Valley, is that when you do solve a big technical problem, over time, the applications become huge. And so when you're solving fundamental problems, the applications are wide and far. And I think that's going to be the same for augmented reality. I think we're really just at the beginning of it. So there's a few things that are being done now that are pretty clear. But you could envision, a whole range of applications, for example, in education and training and entertainment, and it's really endless. And we're kind of not even at the first inning of that.
Excellent. Okay, that's you're right. I mean, 3D printing, as an example, is also adding a very amazing dimension to this whole thing. What if we can create a physical manifestation of a human as a 3D printed form that could have a remote surgery performed on it, and as time goes on, that becomes a digital avatar. And you have machines that could help perform surgery. So yeah, you're right. The possibilities are just endless.
Yeah, it's a great example because 3D printing, people were really thinking kind of smaller on the basic level about parts, but now there's body parts. I mean, I know there's a company in Texas that's printing houses, and they built a house in about 10 hours. Like that was clearly not in the original vision of what you could do. But as the technology gets more refined, as volume comes up, as we get more computing power, these things spread wide and far. That's the history of software. It's the history of solid state computing as well.
Yeah. Tarun, coming to you. So I was talking to this friend of mine. He runs an amazing startup in the Bitcoin space, and he was talking about wanting to hire a UI UX professional who had been dancing around with him to join his firm for a bunch of months, and then decided finally not to, because he created something that he was able to sell in the NFT world for $500,000. So this is a 26-year-old kid who created some amazing art and sold it for $500,000. Says, that's my business. That's my life from here on. Yeah. What do you think are some of the business opportunities that this throws open to the even the single entrepreneurs who are just doing things on their own, or small medium service providers? What sort of opportunities do you think they could open up?
We've been talking about the fact that we are moving to a digital and virtual world for a while now. And I think the whole COVID pandemic kind of accelerated a whole bunch of things. So in my mind, if there is a way for you to digitize anything, there is a way to monetize it too. And if it is, if it can be digitized, it can be monetized, it needs to be stored, and all these different digital ledger technologies ensure that the authenticity of who owns the rights to that is going to stay. So, it's very difficult to say how many people on how many different ways people can use to monetize it. But NFTs, I mean, even till 3-4 months back, people weren't really talking about NFTs as much. And so it's a trend that suddenly caught on, and people realized that they could just, put anything up, almost literally anything up, as long as it was in a digital form and that somebody could own, that you could find a way to monetize it. So, I think the possibilities are endless, and I'm not sure what trends will catch on, but I think if it is digitizable, I think you can probably find a way to make money on it.
Yeah, oh, excellent. Thanks for that, Tarun. Paul, any take from your side? What do you think service providers could be providing in this new metaverse NFT digital ledger sort of driven world? Is it going to be, you see more data services? Do you see more and more tech services? What sort of things do you see evolving?
I think it's really both. I think often when we have new technologies, it's really a reimagining of existing services. So, I think a lot about when these things roll. I spent the early part of my career, first 25 years, starting companies, and so things that when I was a lot younger, they made a lot of sense to me. So, micro-based CAD CAE, which was my first company, we were taking things that had been done on a mainframe and saying, this should be distributed and done in a much lower cost way. And prevailing wisdom then was that doesn't really make a lot of sense. You need the computing power, et cetera. You fast forward to more recently, and I think about if someone had come to me and said, I've got this great investment for you. You're going to rent out your house. You're going to have people sleeping on your couch and in your place. I would say you're out of your mind. But Airbnb made a lot of sense to a different generation that said we don't use a lot of these assets all the time, and so this makes sense, just like Uber made sense. So I think that and that wasn't new. I mean, that's the hotel business, and I think Airbnb today probably rents out more room than a lot of the major hotels combined. So there's two aspects to it. One is a reimagining of services in a different way that maybe is more efficient, maybe is more accessible, maybe has a lot lower cost. And then I think the other aspect of it is new services that we haven't really thought of yet. And so, whenever, again, we're not in the early stage of investment, that's not really our space. But, when we invest in, a company like FTX or a company like Figment, what we're acknowledging is that this is probably a more efficient way to deliver services and pay for services and set up an infrastructure for payment. And anytime you have something where it's going to be less friction and lower cost and a better customer experience, you may not know how it's going to play out, but you would have to say, this is probably going to win in the end. And those are the kinds of things you want to support. So that's a little bit about how we think about it.
So, Sumit, I wanted to add on a few more things. I think that people are going to make a lot of money in the metaverse because you're going to own things in there. You're going to own a shopping mall. You're going to own a shop in the metaverse. You're going to own a conference venue. So I think one of the quickest ways people will make money, or small businesses can also, if you own a physical shop somewhere now, you might probably own a virtual shop in a mall on the metaverse. So I think that is one thing that will happen, I think, very, very quickly. So people that are in the brick and mortar business, if they can find an equivalent of the same thing in the metaverse, whether it is a service being offered or a real good that is being offered, it may have a place for that in the metaverse. The only, of course, the challenges are different because the metaverse is unlimited, really. Real estate prices go up because you have only so much land, whereas the metaverse is infinite and you can have many different metaverses. So I think it's the logistics and the economic models still have to be figured out. But I think that is something that will happen very, very quickly, very, very quickly.
Correct. Yeah, I hear about this Chinese company that's busy buying all the gas stations in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. Apparel, real estate, conference venues, uh, uh, clothes,
Yeah.
artwork, to decorate your house, I guess. So I think that whole parallel economy will get created in the metaverse. And for small to medium businesses that operate in the brick and mortar business today, may want to look at those opportunities as they come up.
It kind of sounds like the Matrix movie beginning to come real, right? It kind of it's beginning to sound like that. Yeah.
Sumit, this sounds more like Krishna's concept of Maya to me.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's true. How about your take, and Tarun, I'll start with you on this one. And let's stay on the metaverse for a bit, right? It's possibly the, how do I say, the biggest manifestation of dark technologies that a lay person who is not even from the technology world would be hearing about or starting to become familiar with. We heard about the first wedding taking place in the metaverse a few weeks ago, right? And there have been some horrendous crimes committed in the metaverse as well. Do you see a whole legal system that is metaverse specific popping up? Do you see a whole different policing system? What's your take on
my take is that everything in the real world will have to be modeled in the virtual world. So you will need law enforcement. You will need very strict regulations. Crime will be committed on the metaverse, because everything that is digital is also real. I mean, there is real currency being traded, right? It might be cryptocurrency. That might be the way you do your transactions. But anywhere where there is money involved, there is also the potential of crime. And the real world and the physical world and the virtual world, I think, collide in many different ways. So on one end, we talk about the benefits of dark technology, saying that, hey, all of the scale becomes possible, computing power becomes endless, becomes cheap, and you need that kind of a infrastructure to be able to support it. But it also gives power to the hackers and to the people who have some evil intentions, right? In as long as computing was being done sequentially, if you said I have a 10-character password and it's going to take somebody years and years to be able to hack through my password, using quantum computing, you can do it in seconds now, right? So if I can use the physical networks to be able to break into the virtual networks, then there is a lot of crime that can get committed. So yes, I think a new legal system is required, regulations are required, policing is required. All the things that we find today in our real world, I think we'll have to find an equivalent in the metaverse and in the digital world too.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. And especially when I read about this crime committed in the metaverse, and the person in the physical world getting traumatized because this happened to her avatar, and having to seek counseling and help in the physical world. I do think that, and I'm sure that it's on a lot of plethora of opportunities as well, right? For services firms too.
But it's not only in the digital world, right? I mean, there is like I said, a correlation to the real world, right? If you got an asset stolen in your virtual world, you still bought it with cryptocurrency, which has a bearing on the real world as well, right? So you're not just losing something virtually, you're also probably losing something of value in your real world in which you live, right? So they're intermingled. I don't think that they are two separate things.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the lines are pretty blurred, and, the whole idea, whether you're creating a new reality or, mirroring reality, is you're going to have the same feelings, the same emotions, the same opportunities, but also the same threats. There's really not a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-boggling sometimes when I just think of it as to what, but I do believe this is real. It's coming at us real fast, and that light at the end of the tunnel in this case is definitely a speeding train. It's not an opening on the other side. Paul, quick comments on distributed ledgers. What beyond Bitcoin? What else are you seeing out there, right? What's some of the most pervasive applications of ledgers that you're seeing in the world out there?
Well, again, we're in the pretty early stages of it. So, and we're not seeing always the, startups, because that's not really the stage
Yeah.
that we invest in. But, broadly, I think we're seeing kind of two things at our stage. One is kind of basic infrastructure and infrastructure tools. And, I always think back to analogies, because this stuff, when you think about it, tends to look the same. When internet started, I don't think any of us really knew what was going to be built out, but a lot of the first winners were the people, developing shovels and picks and tools. And that building out the infrastructure and then having the tools to be able to develop applications is critical. So we are seeing a lot of those kinds of companies. And then the second thing outside of the infrastructure on the application side is really a reimagining of payment systems and associated services in a way that is not only more efficient, but more accessible and maybe more open and more transparent. And that's what the internet was. That was, you think about travel before the internet, you call a travel agent, they tell you there's only 2 seats left, and they're very expensive. Now you go online, you see there's 300 seats on the plane, and you can get them very cheap. Same thing is really happening. And that's why you're seeing such a I think a lot of defiance from a lot of the banks. They're saying they don't really believe in it, and because they're very threatened quietly, they're actually all using blockchain already.
Really?
They've embraced that. They're just trying to catch up and make sure they have some way to control it, because just like the internet flattened a lot of the margin structures in a lot of industries, blockchain and associated technologies is really doing the same thing. I think, to me, the bigger question, when you're investing, is where things are going to, not where they start, but also where they're going to end up. And, right now, the ones that are waxing most eloquent about this great, beautiful new world of the new web and how it's going to be democratic and open are largely venture capitalists that are backing a lot of these companies. And ultimately, you may see a very similar structure to the last internet, which is you have, a lot of dominant players that are monetizing it. So it's probably not going to be the nirvana that everyone's making it out to be. But it's certainly going to change, the nature of both payment and associated services. You think about early internet going from search to e-commerce and all these, new companies that develop. I think we're going to see the same thing, associated with blockchain and the crypto technologies.
Yeah. Perfect. And that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that call. Tarun, any closing comments? We're almost at the end of our time. Before I turn this back over to Pooja, any other closing comments from your end?
Yeah. I'll just say that, while we talked a lot about the metaverse and the virtual world, I think that all of these technologies have a big role to play in the real world. I think when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to pharmacy and healthcare, I think the ability to have that kind of computing power basically means that you can get drugs to market sooner. We already saw that, right? The vaccine came out for COVID came out in record time. And I think that it's only going to get faster. The ability to use a lot of these technologies in securing our day-to-day lives in wartime. There is, of course, financial modeling. As the world becomes flat and cryptocurrencies come into play, you also need better techniques to be able to model it. So computing power is required over there. So quantum computing plays a very important role in that. So it's other than the floating avatars. I think that almost every single industry has a lot to benefit from a lot of these technologies. And there are going to be physical limitations in terms of physics to chip design, but the new way of looking at things in terms of quantum computing, it brings significant power, because while you might have physical limitations on how much faster you can make a particular chip, the power of bringing all of these things together can bring a lot more computing power. And things that were unimaginable earlier, with things that people said took years to do or months to do, even with the fastest supercomputers, now happen in seconds. So I think that the next 5 years are really important. Same thing with digital distributed ledgers. Its primary application, while a lot of people talk about it in terms of bitcoins and cryptocurrency, I think record keeping, simple things like who owns a piece of land, right? And all of those kind of things are also going to come into play. Who owns a patent to a particular invention or a particular drug? A lot of those things need to move to distributed ledger technologies, right? So artificial intelligence, of course, has been talked about a lot, and that is becoming real in almost every aspect of our life. So I think DARQ is a theme that is going to continue to stay. I think it's going to gain a lot of momentum. And while a lot of the things are in place, I think they're still clunky. And what you will see, I think, is the smoothing out of that. Even today, I can, put my Apple laptop on my table to see how it looks when I'm deciding to buy it from the Apple website. But it's clunky. My interactions are clunky.
Mhm.
As these things smoothen out, I think you'll start to see a very real shift to a very different world that we will all live in, especially our kids.
Well, just last thing I'll add, again, we try to think on these things on pretty simple levels. When we think about blockchain, there's kind of, three basic aspects. One is it solves a problem of trust. And when you can solve a problem of trust, there's all kinds of commerce that you can now do that maybe you couldn't do before. And you can do it on a very large scale. So one, you create new services, but you also really widen the market. I think the second aspect of it is that when you can create trust, you have community, and you can create community. So that opens up lots of opportunities, both on the consumer and the enterprise side. And the third thing is cost. So, when I think about some of my very last company, there was a lot of applications around our technology around remote telemedicine. And so you were bringing people into the healthcare system that really didn't have the opportunity, either because they didn't live in a major city or they couldn't afford it. And so when you think about, blockchain and a lot of the associated technologies with that, think of like a charge on a currency trade or a money transfer. That's very, very expensive. And now you can do it with basically zero cost or pennies versus high percentage. You're saving a lot of money for a lot of people. You're bringing a lot of people now into an economy that maybe they couldn't participate in. And those are the things that I think are really exciting to us when we think about how we apply this and what the growth is.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That was wonderful. Thank you for that, Paul. I think lots of social implications, a lot of implication for new set of services and capabilities that the marketplace is going to need, both in the real world as well as in the virtual world. Possibly dramatically different business models to support this dark economy. And I would say, the future is dark, but quite bright. So thank you, Paul, for taking the time. Tarun, thank you so much as well. This was a wonderful session. And I hope all of our audience got something interesting out of it. And back over to you, Pooja. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Sumit. Take care, Tarun.
Bye. Thank you. Nice seeing you, Paul. Bye.
Bye-bye.